So, Mike, you bring a really unique perspective as someone who's led global sales teams, but also been a CEO of growth-focused early stage
Mhm.
companies. There's this balance beam that on the culture side of it, and I know I've talked to many entrepreneurs and leaders that say that's one of the most challenging things that they do is to build and sustain a healthy culture. Starting there, what are some of the key things that you found that are important there?
Well, you, first of all, it's great to see you again, Dan. Always a pleasure to speak with you. That's a meaty topic that you've just rolled out. I think, a healthy portion of your project Impact Makers really kind of dives into dealing with this issue. And I think a balance beam, as you put it, it is a wonderful visual as a leader to kind of ensure that you're walking intentionally. The culture side of it, really, let's make an assumption. Let's make an assumption that most leaders that are stepping in an assignment like this and have the responsibility to go create or reformat a new culture that focuses on performance, um, have a lot of work to do and they have a defined timeline, right? Very few of us get into assignments where it's like, yeah, when you're done, right? Most boards are never that forgiving. Investors and boards of directors have a very defined timeline, and they're usually shorter than what you believe can be done. But you roll up your sleeves and you get at it. I think the biggest thing in establishing a performance-oriented culture is baselining the current situation and articulating, packaging up the strategy and the plan of where you want to take the organization, right? So communicating, I'll call it the journey, right? Communicating the group journey of where you are now to where you want to go over what kind of timeline is hugely important. Making it relatable is also a really important thing. Regardless of whether you're a small team leader, this is your first leadership assignment, or you're a CEO, you've got to make it relatable to every level in the organization and every person in the organization. If you don't, first of all, it's a fatal error in my opinion if you get out of the blocks and you haven't made that connection with everybody at a personal level on the journey that you're asking them to undertake with you. And secondly, I think you're missing out on tapping a lot of capability and skill sets and energy that they can put to that journey, right? So taking the time up front, establishing, I'll call the term as is, the current state, this is where we're at, and this is where we're going. Articulating, communicating all of that is important, measurable goals, how we're going to measure success. I mean, think about it. We're both family guys, right? When we had kids in the back of the car, you heard the question every 20 minutes, right? Are we there yet? Are we there yet? You've got to answer the organizational, are you there yet question that is going to naturally come. So giving them KPIs, key milestones. This is where we're at in this journey. All of those things are super important to get that performance culture laid. The last piece, and I mentioned relatable, Dan. The last piece is you know, making sure at an individual level they understand that their contributions are critically important to the journey, right? Answering the why. Why are you asking me to join this? So getting that emotional and personal connection to the journey, the mission, the project, the strategy is super important to the establishment, call it pouring the foundation of a performance oriented culture at an individual level, all eyeballs signing up to the program and saying, I'm on board.
Yeah, that relatability, that connection with each team member is so important. You and I have been in so many town halls with the
Yeah,
slideshow, and you can actually look at the body language out in the audience
for
when you
sure.
aren't achieving that connection, and everyone's sitting there, and then you'll see the eyes just kind of glaze over, and they're not getting it. And
Right.
so I think making sure you have that level of understanding connection is so important in building that culture. Now, let's flip it over to the other side of the balance beam.
Yeah.
So if you have created that alignment and
Yep.
understanding, how do you really ensure then along the journey that at each team member level that you've got that real accountability?
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I mentioned in the performance culture, attributes that you absolutely have to take the time to instill are the KPIs, the measurements, right? And getting buy-in at an individual level. In this approach works whether or not you're leading multiple teams as a C-level executive or you're a first-time leader of a small team. Getting individual buy-in to the goals that they're assigned is ultimately the most important thing that you can do as a leader. And then frequent check-ins, right? This is not autopilot. You can't just let your hands off the wheel and walk away. You've got to roll your sleeves up and get involved. And I don't care if you're a Fortune 50 or if you're a new startup, you have to be involved as a leader. I think that's important too with the performance culture because it eradicates all shreds of hypocrisy. Because what you're asking them to do, go on this journey, they're watching you every day. Invest yourself and your time and talent in that. So making sure the KPIs, are meaningful at an individual level, following up on them. And here's the one, although you didn't ask it, right? It races to the forefront of my mind, Dan. The critical error that I see a lot of leaders make the mistake of doing, which is when there are performance issues at an individual level, they ignore them. Let's be real, right? Having confrontation is not a fun part of being a leader. It is probably the single most uncomfortable thing that people can do is challenge somebody and confront somebody on a performance issue. But here is a secret that I know you already know, and I know as leaders. People in your organization already know you have a problem before you discover it, right? I mean, think back to our early stages of our career in the lunchrooms, at lunch. What are you talking about? Wow, we've got a real beef, meaty, project on our hands, tough timeline. I can't believe fill in the blank is just mailing it in, right? We're having to work extra hours to cover their backside, blah, blah, blah. Your organization knows they have a healthier pulse on what's going on than you do. So that's why it's so important to be visible, to be involved, to be taking the pulse regularly. And when you spot organizational performance issues at an individual level, get involved. The reason why you should and treat it with a sense of urgency is if you don't, you scream hypocrisy, okay, which immediately leads to talent exodus. And your desire of establishing a performance oriented culture goes out the window fast. So while it's uncomfortable and nobody likes doing it, being transparent up front and getting that linkage and that buy-in at an individual level ultimately pays off when you have to have those one-on-one confrontations with folks, right? Be fair about it, point back to what the expectations were, make sure they understand that you need alignment, and respond with a very fast and fairly constructed performance plan. 30 days, right? We don't have all the time in the world. So make it a short sprint. And if they respond, congratulations. You've done probably the most Herculean and under rewarded thing as a leader, which is turn around an individual to make them a great contributor to your organization. If they don't respond, you need to make a move. You need to move on and replace that talent. It's fair and equitable. It's the right thing to do for the bigger picture and for that ultimately individual. So I think walk back to your balance beam, that visual, Dan. I think as long as you walk it fairly and with transparency on what you're trying to accomplish and everybody understanding their expectations of them, that's the path to success in that environment.
Yeah, you said some really powerful things. And when you talk about frequent check-ins, we're
Yeah.
not talking micromanagement. We're actually
No.
even bringing a servant leader mindset, which is more empowering. It's actually showing interest and
Yes.
engagement, and actually the power of listening, the ability to actually hear from your team member in terms of their perspective on what's working well, what isn't. It gives you that opportunity. By not doing that proactive check-in, you don't have that opportunity. So it's
Right.
actually empowering and a servant leader approach, not helicopter management in any way.
Yeah. I also want to add, absolutely agree, Dan. I also want to add if not if when you ultimately as a leader have to have those one-on-one performance discussions, I think it's really important for you to make sure you convey a message of we're in this together, right? Don't convey in that meeting you're on an island, you got 30 days to figure it out, and I hope you emerge on the other side successful. Those typically lead to 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and they're punching out of the organization because they can read the writing on the wall. I think the message is we're in this together. I will help you as your leader as much as I possibly can. My door is open, literally and figuratively. See me, use me as a resource. Let me know when you have questions, and let's emerge through this thing successful so that you're making the contributions that your team needs. I mean, if you step back and you're leading a team through a very challenging project, let's say you've got 100 individuals in an organization, just to throw a number out, you know, you've got 10 or 15 that are the key core contributors that really drive the engine, right? So I'm not talking about the natural ebb and flow of energy and focus and contributions that a mixed team has into, an organization's success. I'm talking about systemic issues, systemic performance issues. So I think this is, you and I could talk for hours about this, especially about servant leadership attributes. Back to, you triggered the thought and the visual of, articulating, communicating the plan itself, and then rolling up your sleeves and being visually involved in enabling your team to be successful, including intervention when there is sub performance going on. Those are servant leadership attributes, Dan.